Hi, this is Tom Pennington. I'm your instructor, and I would like to talk about this issue of family problems surrounding substance abuse. Now, I want to be careful about this. It didn't look like we were all going to be able to get together at the same time, so I'm going to post this video as an alternative. If you have any questions, please email me, call me, whatever you want to do there. Be happy to talk to you about any of these. But I do want to talk specifically about some of the things that happen to a family and to the person who's trying to recover, because I think that's something that we kind of forget sometimes, that not only does the person who are abusing the substances affect the family, but the family affects the person who is abusing the substances. This isn't a one-way street. And I think it was important enough to post this video and talk about it. So I do want to apologize. I don't have my glasses on because the light just kept reflecting off of it, and I didn't want to look spooky. So if I blink and stare, it's because I can't really see my reflection in this camera. Let's talk about substance abuse. The abusers themselves get a lot of attention. And not only are most of the funds, public funds, spent on people who are abusing drugs, but most of the focus is on people who are abusing drugs. Now, for every person who is abusing drugs, there's at least 2 or 3 other people who are affected by that person's use. Usually the number is about 5 to 1. That means that we spend roughly 80 to 90% of all resources on 20% of the overall problem. So let those numbers kind of ruminate for a minute. Let me explain this just a little bit more detail. A person who is using the drugs has not only an emotional and mental effect, they have a very physical effect. In the family, the effects from anxiety, stress, depression, all centered around this other person's use, become very problematic, not only mentally and emotionally, but physically. So when I worked at the hospital, I kind of watched this. A lot of our heart patients, a lot of our diabetes patients, a lot of folks with mental health concerns came in, not primarily because these were their chief complaint. They came in because their chief complaint was somebody in their family was abusing drugs and they were worrying themselves sick. So that old saying, she worried herself to death, or he worried himself to death, that's literal. We can actually do that. Substance abuse creates such an issue for the families that people create their own type of just very intense and debilitating sometimes stress. If we take a look at the criteria for substance abuse and compare it to some of the symptoms that the family has, we focus entirely on the person who's using. We have disruptions in our daily functioning. I can't go to work because I had to stay home and take care of my loved one. They were too hungover, they were too high, they were too dope sick. I couldn't leave them. They missed work, they missed job opportunities. Many people will miss events with their children because there is a spouse or another adult who are abusing drugs and have disrupted the whole thing. One of our classmates talked about a time when her mother completely forgot that she'd made a promise. This is extremely common. So we have all these kind of family, work, legal disruptions, these stories about people who were so distracted they were rushing to bail out their loved one out of jail because they'd been picked up for something and they had a car accident. Or they forgot to pay bills. They had to give money to somebody they cared about who was just spending it at the dope boys or spending it at the bar, couldn't pay their rent. These are commonplace stories. And these are the kind of effects. So if we look at the symptoms, the criteria for substance abuse disorder, which are continued use despite negative consequences, increased tolerance, repeated failures to stop, change, or cut down, withdrawal when they're trying to stop or cut down, and legal issues, disruptions in daily functioning, those kind of things. Let's compare this to the family. So the family has increased tolerance. Sounds like this. Do that one more time, you're out of here. But then one more time becomes one more time, becomes one more time, becomes 100 times. Increased tolerance. Continued use despite negative consequences. Well, I know that he beat me, but he swore he'd never do it again. And he's not been drinking for the last 2 weeks. That's one example. Another one is, she's my daughter. How could I not help her? Continued use, continued indulgence in a behavior. See, the real problem here is not that there's no addiction involved, because there is an addiction. Withdrawal. Oh, I miss him so bad. Oh, I miss him so bad. I know I have to go to work, but I just worry the whole time I'm at work. Withdrawal. See, we have an addiction. The addiction is just not to a substance. It's an addiction to a person. Now, in this respect, this tells you, and this class is very helpful for you if you're going to be in the helping profession and work with any addicted people. It tells you something. It tells you something very important, that we don't really get addicted to the substances. We get addicted to the emotions that the substances create. So if a person gives me purpose, I have to watch her. She's my daughter. I have to take care of her. I have to call his boss and tell him he can't come to work because, well, what would a good wife do? See, they elicit this kind of, I'm needed. I have to take care of this person. We start to get our self-worth from taking care of this person, except that this person, they keep disappointing us. They keep using drugs. We can't change them. But we try, and we try, and we try, and we try. Repeated failed attempts to stop or cut down. I'm never going to help him again until I do. Repeated failed attempts to stop or cut down. So as you see, the criteria fits whether it's a substance like cocaine or heroin, or a person who's using the cocaine and heroin. So codependency then really means that I'm hooked on the person who's hooked on the dope or the alcohol. In the case of gambling, this becomes very, very apparent very quickly, because those partners very rarely indulge that behavior for a long period of time. Gambling is financially destructive. Anybody who's had any experience with a heroin addict or a crack cocaine addict, they know that these people can go through just a mountain of money in no time at all. But gambling puts that to shame. Gambling can take a rich person and turn him into a pauper within a few months' time. So it's not that the spouses don't want to stay or don't want to indulge their codependency. They just can't. The resources just aren't there. Won't support them. So gamblers end up, and not just for that reason, but they often end up by themselves. And the other reason for that is their extreme narcissism. But that's for another class at another time. Right now, what I really want to leave you with is this idea that the families can get just as addicted to their loved ones as the loved one ever was addicted to a drug or to alcohol. This is a fact that all the research has kind of slipped by. There is a mountain of research on it, by the way. All of it agrees on one point, that the families don't get the help that they need. So the families are the easiest people to ignore, And not necessarily because we want to, but because they don't think they have a problem. The stigma about substance abuse is so entrenched that we believe that if I'm not using, I don't have a problem. It's somebody else's problem. And it makes a certain amount of logic, except that it's not very logical at all. If I allow somebody to cause me to miss work, on anything that they did, I made a decision not to go to work. And I can always blame them because they're the ones using the drugs. They're the ones that, I had to stay home and take care of them. It wasn't my fault. Sounds an awful lot like a drug addict, doesn't it? So I really want to leave you with the idea that this whole issue of families and how best to help families and how best to really start to take a look at just how extensive this disease is really starts with the notion that we can become addicted to a person in exactly the same way as we can become addicted to a substance. Now, this idea is really not controversial at all, and anyone that knows anything about the neuroscience or the neuroscientific mechanisms behind addiction will readily agree with this. However, you will find that it's one of the most neglected, and unfortunately, the families are the least treated and the most neglected for this reason and this reason alone. Insurance companies won't pay for the treatment. And if you call and verify benefits for any insurance company, in particular Medicaid, they will just flat tell you substance abuse services are covered for the affected person, the person who has a substance abuse problem, but not for the treatment of codependency or related family issues. And that's the disclaimer they use 100% of the time. So for you guys coming into the field, I wanted you to see this video and to understand that this is a very big problem. It affects people physically, mentally, emotionally. We see a lot of incidences of depression. Not so much suicidal ideation, however. That is a very extreme and kind of rare symptom of what I'm talking about today. Usually what we see is chronic depression. People that, they've struggled against this. They've tried to get people to change. Their family members won't change. They give up. And they become actually a burden to the rest of their family and to themselves because they can no longer work. They can no longer take care of themselves. Their hygiene starts to slip. They fall into a deep depression. Some folks, some family members, actually find that this becomes their new depression or their new addiction because depression gets them the attention, particularly from the affected family member or the substance abuser, that gets them the particular attention that they never got before. And they kind of crave that. So there's a lot to this, and I'm not going to keep you any longer. I'm not going to bore you to death with it. But I will tell you that when we really start to take a step back and look at substance abuse as this mechanism that can only survive in some type of family, and by family, we mean that in a very broad sense. It could just be a collection of friends all taking care of each other. It could be, extended family. It doesn't have to be a biological or a nuclear family or anything at all like that. And as a matter of fact, the deeper that the substance abuser gets into substance abuse, more than likely, it's going to be a collection of people that may or may not be blood related, because eventually we're going to run off just about everybody. And they can only put up with our behavior for so long. Now, here's the really interesting part of it. If you run me off, your substance abuse got to the point where I can't take it anymore, you got to go. Okay? That doesn't end the problem. As a matter of fact, a lot of times, for a lot of families, this makes the problem worse because they are still untreated. In other words, they may have removed the person that was affecting them so much, but did they treat their own addiction? There's the big question, isn't it? There's the one that most practitioners won't come to grips with because they don't know what to do and they don't know how to engage a family because we don't spend any time training people how to do that. So I'll leave you with this, and I really want to get your questions on this. If we were going to treat a family, if we were going to decide they're affected, their addiction was a person, how best could we treat them? What would you do for that person? So eventually, in order for addiction to survive, it needs helpers. The abused person can't take care of himself very well, or the person who's abusing can't take care of themselves very well. So they need some type of family. They will go out and construct that family pretty much out of thin air. The only drug that really can exist in a vacuum or exist without a lot of people around to help it, and this isn't 100% by any means, but alcohol. Alcoholics will tend to isolate, stay by themselves. That only lasts for a certain period of time, and then eventually they hit bottom and they either have to do something or they have to go out and find themselves a helper, or a family, or somebody to help take care of them. So addiction it's this if you really look at it, it's an almost marvelous mechanism that once it starts in motion and once it takes a good root in a group of people, it spreads and spreads, and it doesn't even need the drug in order to spread and to do its damage. So please give me your questions. Let me know what your thoughts are on this. If you think I'm full of crap, please let me know that too. And if you have any dissenting opinions, I'm always interested to hear those. Thanks for being in the class. I really appreciate it. Thank you.